Colonel Andre Hayes never imagined his greatest battle would unfold not on a war-torn field, but on a quiet street in his own country. Dressed in full military uniform, medals glinting in the sun, Andre was stopped by a hostile cop who didn't see a hero, just a black man. No crime, no reason, just suspicion. As the officer's hand hovered near his holster, Andre stood calm. But inside, a storm of fear and disbelief raged. Why did his uniform mean nothing? Why was his skin the threat? For stories that expose truth and stir your soul, subscribe now. Don't miss what's next. Colonel Andre Hayes had survived ambushes, bombings, and the brutality of war, but nothing prepared him for the hostility he faced on the streets of his own nation, where his greatest enemy wasn't foreign, but familiar. On a golden afternoon, he drove his polished black SUV through the suburbs, his army uniform crisp, shining with medals that told stories of sacrifice, courage, and honor. He was on his way to surprise his daughter for her college graduation, a moment he'd waited years for. Pride filled his chest, not just from his rank, but from the promise he made to always protect and serve. But as he turned onto Maple Avenue, flashing red and blue lights shattered that peace. He wasn't speeding. His tags were valid. Yet the sirens screamed for him to pull over. Confused but calm, Andre guided his vehicle to the curb. He turned the ignition off, placed his hands visibly on the wheel, and exhaled slowly, just like he had taught his nephews if they were ever stopped. The officer approached. Tall, pale, eyes hidden behind mirrored shades, and his stance already screamed hostility. No greeting, no explanation. Just a barked command. "Step out of the car, now!" Andre's military instincts kicked in. Composure, clarity, compliance. "May I ask the reason, officer?" he replied, voice respectful but firm. The cop didn't flinch. His hand hovered near his weapon, and his tone got sharper. "You heard me?" Andre's heartbeat quickened, not out of guilt, but out of the cold realization that his skin was speaking louder than his uniform. He stepped out slowly, keeping his hands visible, movements deliberate. He stood tall, a man who had faced mortar fire without blinking, now forced to stand down on the street he had fought to defend. The officer's gaze scanned him, pausing on the medals before curling his lip in a sneer. "What are you doing around here, soldier?" There was no respect in the word, no recognition, just suspicion, racism cloaked in authority. "I'm heading to my daughter's graduation," Andre answered, jaw clenched. "I've done nothing wrong." But the officer wasn't listening. "You look like trouble. What's in the car?" Drugs? Weapons? The accusation spilled from his mouth like venom. Andre's breath caught. This wasn't just a stop. This was a setup. And all it would take was one wrong word, one flinch, and the story could end with him lying cold on the concrete. He raised his hands slightly, aware of the growing number of people watching. Phones were out, eyes wide. Some whispered, some shouted in protest. But no one stepped forward. Andre had led men into enemy fire, but here he stood, unarmed, vulnerable, targeted. "I'm not a threat," he said clearly. "I'm Colonel Andre Hayes, U.S. Army." The officer scoffed. "You think that makes you special?" Then, without warning, he grabbed Andre's arm, yanked him down, and forced him onto the pavement. The heat of the asphalt burned through Andre's uniform. The cop's knee dug into his back, pressing the air from his lungs. Around him, the crowd roared in disbelief. "He didn't do anything!" "Get off him!" But the officer was locked in, deaf to reason, blind with bias. Andre's medals scraped against the ground as he struggled to breathe. Was this it? After all the years, all the missions, all the lives he saved, was this how it ended? Then came another siren. A different tone. A second cruiser screeched to a halt, and out stepped a woman in uniform. Lieutenant Carmen Brooks. She froze for half a second at the scene, then charged forward like a missile. "Officer Reynolds! Stand down, now!" Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Reynolds hesitated, his grip faltering. He resisted, he muttered. He fit the description. But Carmen wasn't having it. "That man is a decorated colonel. I served under him in Afghanistan. He saved my unit during a blackout operation." And she shoved Reynolds aside and helped Andre up, brushing dust from his shoulders with trembling hands. "Sir," she said, voice cracking, "are you all right?" Andre looked at her, then around at the silent crowd. His chest heaved, not from the struggle, but from the rage, the shame, the exhaustion of always having to prove his humanity. "I'm alive," he said, "but that doesn't mean I'm okay." Lieutenant Brooks turned to the crowd. "You all saw this! Record it! Share it! Don't let this be another story swept under the rug." She then turned on Reynolds with ice in her eyes. "You're suspended, effective immediately. Internal Affairs will handle the rest." Reynolds' face paled as murmurs turned to shouts. A few people clapped. Others cried. Andre stood silently in the center, his uniform rumpled, his body aching, but his presence unshaken. "Why?" someone called from the crowd. "Why'd he do that to you?" Andre looked toward the voice, eyes locked with a young boy holding a phone. He saw in that boy's face the same fear he'd seen in his own reflection too many times. "Because sometimes, no matter what you've done, the world only sees your skin." Silence. Thick, heavy, echoing. And then he added, voice like thunder. "But that doesn't mean we stop standing tall." Colonel Andre Hayes didn't press charges. He didn't need to. The truth had already gone viral. But more importantly, he used the moment to speak to schools, youth programs, and police academies about bias, dignity, and the power of perception. His story became more than a headline. It became a movement. The sun was barely rising when Elijah Cross, a quiet, brilliant 17-year-old black student, zipped up his hoodie, slung his worn-out backpack over one shoulder, and stepped out the front door of his run-down apartment building in Eastbrook, one of those forgotten neighborhoods the city only remembered during elections or after violence. He kept his head down as he walked past boarded-up storefronts, broken glass, and graffitied walls, his sneakers pressing quietly against cracked concrete. He had a dream: to become a mechanical engineer, to escape the weight of his environment and rewrite the legacy that had followed his family like a shadow for generations. Elijah wasn't just smart, he was gifted. His teacher said he had a mind like Da Vinci and hands like an architect. But brilliance didn't keep the lights on. His mom worked double shifts at a nursing home, and his father? Gone before Elijah could ever remember his face. Every morning, Elijah walked 5 miles to the better school across town, the one with working heat, updated textbooks, and teachers who actually stayed through the semester. He had to lie about his address just to get in, a daily risk that could unravel everything he was fighting for. That morning felt different. Tense. Heavy. The air smelled like wet asphalt and tension as Elijah crossed over into Oak Ridge, a clean, gated suburb that never saw graffiti, unless it was an art mural. He noticed the stairs. A white jogger crossed to the other side of the street. A woman pulling her child along the sidewalk tightened her grip. Elijah was used to it. but it still stabbed. Every time. Still, he pressed forward. He had a scholarship interview after school, a chance to go to MIT. Everything was riding on today, but fate had other plans. As he neared the school, a police cruiser crept up behind him, slow, watching. Elijah's stomach twisted. He'd been taught what to do. Hands visible. Don't run. Don't talk back. Just stay calm. He turned slightly, giving a respectful nod. The cruiser didn't move. Then came the chirp of the siren. "You! Stop right there!" a voice barked from the loudspeaker. Elijah froze, confused. He wasn't even on the school property yet. 2 officers jumped out. One young, jittery, hand already twitching near his belt. The other older, eyes hard, expression cold. "We got a call about a suspicious person," the older cop said, stepping close. Elijah tried to stay calm. "I'm just walking to school, sir." "What's in the bag?" the younger one snapped. "Books," Elijah replied. But it didn't matter. They grabbed the bag, dumping it onto the sidewalk. Notebooks, pencils, a TI-84 calculator spilled out. "Where'd you steal this?" the older one asked, picking up the calculator. Elijah's chest tightened. "It's mine. I saved up." "Sure you did." Then they pushed him against the cruiser, cold metal against his cheek. His hands were twisted behind his back. "Stop resisting!" one shouted, though Elijah wasn't moving. He felt something snap in his wrist. Pain shot up his arm. "I'm not resisting!" he cried, tears stinging his eyes. But the sidewalk was already littered with phone cameras. Students arriving early had started filming. A teacher rushed out. "He's our student!" she shouted, her voice shaky with panic. "He didn't do anything!" By the time they let him go, without charges, without apology, he was bruised, humiliated, and trembling. He missed his scholarship interview, the opportunity of a lifetime, shattered like the screen of his phone, which had cracked when it hit the pavement during the scuffle. At home, his mom held him, sobbing. "I told you to just go to the closer school," she wept. "It ain't worth this, baby." But Elijah couldn't let go. The dream was still burning, even if the flame had dimmed. Things got worse. News of the incident went viral for a day, but then died under the weight of louder scandals. At school, some classmates treated him like a criminal. "Must have looked guilty," one whispered. Others avoided him altogether. His grades dropped. His concentration shattered. Nightmares haunted him. Sometimes he'd wake up gasping, feeling phantom hands yank him from his sleep. He started walking new routes to school, longer ones, avoiding certain blocks. But it didn't matter. The second incident came 2 weeks later. Elijah was at the corner store near his neighborhood, grabbing Gatorade and chips after school, when a security guard followed him through every aisle. Elijah could feel it, the judgment, the doubt. At checkout, the guard stopped him at the door. "Empty your pockets," he demanded. Elijah's face flushed with embarrassment. "I paid," he said quietly. "Got a receipt." But the guard didn't care. He patted him down anyway. "It's protocol," he muttered. "People like you." Elijah didn't hear the rest. He was already outside, sprinting home, tears blurring his vision. The world felt different now, tighter, like every breath was a test. He didn't smile as much. His drawings, once filled with gears and blueprints, sat untouched in his sketchbook. His teachers asked if he was okay. He lied, said he was tired. But inside, he was crumbling. Then came the worst blow. One evening, while walking home from tutoring, Elijah passed a group of officers making an arrest across the street. He kept his head down, earbuds in, no eye contact. But one officer suddenly broke away and approached him. "Hey, come here." Elijah froze. "Why?" "Because I said so." Before Elijah could speak, the cop grabbed him. The others followed. "What's your name?" "I didn't do anything," Elijah pleaded. They shoved him against a wall. One of them laughed. "Look at this one. Always acting like they're innocent." A punch landed in his gut, hard, wind stolen from his lungs. He collapsed. "Resisting," one of them said. They laughed again. He woke up in a holding cell with a busted lip, swollen jaw, and torn hoodie. They let him out the next morning. No charges, no apology, just silence and paperwork. That was the day something broke in Elijah. He stopped talking in class. He barely ate. He didn't apply to college. His scholarship hopes were gone. Trust? Gone. He'd once believed his mind could save him, his talent could shield him. But now he knew. His skin screamed louder than any diploma ever could. His mom tried everything: counseling, pastors, uncles from out of town who sat him down and talked about staying strong. But they didn't understand. They hadn't lived it in this time, this America. Elijah didn't want to be strong. He wanted to be seen. One night, while sketching alone in his room, he heard shouting outside. Another police stop. A teen thrown against a car. Elijah stared out the window, fists clenched. He couldn't stay silent anymore. He grabbed his phone and started recording. The next day, he uploaded a montage, a collage of his drawings spliced with video clips of what he'd been through. It went viral. Millions watched. News outlets called. Activists reached out. For the first time, he spoke out, told the full story, every injustice, every bruise, every broken dream. People wept, donated, demanded change. Elijah didn't want pity. He wanted reform. And now he had a voice. Slowly, his fire returned. Not the naive dream of escaping the system, but the deeper purpose of changing it. He enrolled in community college, focused on civil engineering, and created a nonprofit helping young Black students access STEM education and mentorship. He started designing safe community tech, streetlights with body cam syncing, emergency alert devices for teens, neighborhood drones with automatic video backups. He turned pain into purpose. He became a symbol, a blueprint for resilience. But the scars remained. So did the questions. Would anything really change? Would the next Elijah survive his first mistake, or his first hoodie? He didn't know, but he kept building, kept dreaming, kept rising. From the outside, Ava Monroe looked unbreakable. Sharp suits, commanding voice, award-winning lawyer. But no one saw the storm she fought behind closed doors, or the secret that threatened to ruin everything she'd built. Every morning, she stared at herself in the mirror, adjusting her blazer, steadying her trembling hands, forcing a smile that barely masked the war beneath her skin. She had made a name for herself fighting for the wrongly accused, especially young Black men railroaded by a system that had never seen them as innocent. Her passion burned deep, rooted in her own past, in memories she never spoke aloud. But something had changed. For weeks now, Ava had been followed, watched. She wasn't imagining it. The same unmarked black SUV would appear in her rearview mirror, parked outside her home, her office. Her inbox filled with anonymous messages. "Stay out of it. Wrong case, wrong side. We're watching you." The threats came after she took the case of Darnell Briggs, a teenage boy accused of shooting a police officer, despite evidence that he hadn't even been in the state that night. The city wanted someone to blame. Darnell was easy. Poor, black, and alone. Ava took the case because no one else would, and because something about Darnell reminded her of her brother Jamal, wrongfully imprisoned at 19, dead in his cell before the appeal could go through. The wound had never healed. Now, with Darnell's life in her hands, Ava couldn't afford mistakes. But the system was eating her alive. Judges gave her side eyes in court. Witnesses were threatened. Files mysteriously went missing from her office. And then it happened. Her car tires slashed outside the courthouse. Her office windows shattered. A note pinned to her door. Last warning. She didn't tell the police. She didn't trust them. Not after what she'd seen. Not after what they'd done to Jamal. But the fear? It was real. Paralyzing. She barely slept. She jumped at every sound. Her mind was a minefield. What if they came to her home? What if they hurt her intern Maya, barely 22, and still full of belief in justice? Ava carried pepper spray now. A stun gun in her purse. She kept one hand on her phone, always recording. The pressure was unbearable. The case was falling apart. Witnesses recanted. One disappeared entirely. But Ava wouldn't back down. Couldn't. She owed it to Darnell. To Jamal. To every soul crushed under the weight of systemic injustice. Then, one night, everything changed. Ava was working late, alone in her office, papers spread across her desk like a battlefield. She was digging into time-stamped surveillance footage from a gas station 2 states away, the only thing that could prove Darnell's alibi. She had finally obtained it through a subpoena, but the quality was grainy. She zoomed in, heart pounding, and there it was. Darnell's face. Clear. Smiling. Time-stamped 5 minutes after the officer was shot. 300 miles away. It was gold. She had it. She could win. But before she could save the file, the power went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Ava froze. Her laptop screen flickered, then shut off. Silence. Then footsteps. Heavy. Close. Coming up the stairs. Her heart thundered. She grabbed her phone, hit record, and slipped into the supply closet, breath shallow, every second stretching like an eternity. The door creaked open. A flashlight beam scanned the office. Papers rustled. Drawers opened. Then a voice. Low, cold, unmistakable. "Where's the damn footage?" She bit down on a sob, praying she wouldn't be heard. After what felt like forever, the intruder left. But the message was clear. They knew what she had. They were willing to do anything to bury it. The next morning, she didn't go home. She went straight to the media. She held a press conference, footage on a flash drive in hand. Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "My client is innocent. This evidence proves it, and I am not afraid." But she was. She was terrified. Still, the world needed to see the truth. The story went viral. News anchors debated it. Protesters filled the courthouse steps. The DA tried to suppress the footage, but it was too late. Public pressure mounted. Darnell's charges were dropped. But the fight came at a cost. Ava's law license was investigated. Anonymous complaints flooded the board. She was followed home, trailed by shadowy figures in plain cars. Her windows were smashed again. This time, they left a photo of Jamal's prison file, blood-stained. It was personal now. She broke down one night in the shower, silent tears slipping down her cheeks, water washing away nothing. She questioned everything. Was it worth it? This pain, this fear, this isolation. She was losing herself, losing sleep, losing her peace, but not her purpose. Because Darnell walked free. Because his mother hugged her with a strength that made Ava cry for the first time in years. Because when Darnell looked her in the eyes and said, "You saved me," she knew. This was why she fought, and she would keep fighting. There are some stories that seem too unbelievable to be true. Stories where the line between bravery and madness is so thin, you wonder what kind of person would ever dare to cross it. But he did. Marcus Lane wasn't the type of man who ever asked for attention. He was quiet, observant, the kind of person who could walk into a room and disappear if he wanted to. A systems analyst by profession, and a loving single father by necessity, Marcus lived a structured life. Everything about him was calculated, until the moment he uncovered something that shattered every rule he had ever lived by. What he found wasn't supposed to be found. A series of encrypted files buried deep within a city server, data that revealed a horrifying truth. A secret police database tracking innocent black residents under the guise of preventative surveillance, labeling them as potential threats based on biased AI profiles and anonymous community tips. Marcus hadn't meant to see it. He was updating a municipal interface, doing routine back-end diagnostics when he stumbled across a subfolder titled Silent Watch. It should have been locked, but it opened. What he saw changed him forever. His own name was on that list. His brother's. Even his teenage son, Julian. None of them had records. Not a single charge. Just faces, addresses, and vague, chilling notes. Observed in proximity to gang activity. Social media shows defiance of law enforcement. High-risk potential due to family background. Marcus felt the world spin. He sat there, frozen in front of the glowing screen, as if staring into the mouth of some beast that had been watching him his whole life. He knew if he walked away and stayed silent, no one would ever know. And maybe that would have been safer. Maybe that would have been smarter. But Marcus couldn't breathe under the weight of the truth. He knew the system had always been skewed, but seeing it this clearly, this mechanically cold, was like watching freedom bleed out in slow motion. He backed up the data, encrypted it again, and fled the office. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at his son's face as he slept peacefully, unaware that he was already being treated like a suspect for crimes he hadn't even dreamed of. Fear clawed at Marcus's throat. Who could he trust? The city? The press? The police? His phone buzzed around 2 a.m. Unknown number. No words, just a picture of him leaving the office. They knew. The next days were a whirlwind of anxiety and paranoia. He changed his routine, checked his mirrors constantly, switched phones. But still the messages came. Threats, warnings, whispers through the walls of his apartment complex, neighbors looking at him strangely, like they knew something was off. One night, his front door was cracked open when he got home. Nothing stolen. Just a single black USB drive placed on the table. Inside, surveillance video of him, in the shower, in his car, walking Julian to school. It was clear. They were watching everything. Marcus wanted to run, take Julian and disappear. But where? And for how long? Instead, he chose something braver, or more foolish. He reached out to a friend, Leah Torres, an independent journalist who had been blackballed for exposing a weapons deal between city law enforcement and a private contractor. She had nothing to lose. And Marcus needed someone who still remembered what integrity felt like. When Leah saw the files, her hands shook. "This is bigger than anything I've ever seen," she whispered. "If we publish this, they'll come after you." Marcus nodded. "They already are." So they got to work. In secret, at night, in coffee shops with no Wi-Fi, burner phones, paper notes. They built a case, a full exposé. But as the deadline to publish drew near, so did the danger. One morning, Julian didn't show up to school. Panic tore through Marcus like fire. He called everyone. No one had seen him. Then a call came in. Blocked number. "Stop digging, or the boy won't come back." The voice was calm, confident. Marcus broke, fell to his knees in the middle of the street. His son, his world, was gone. He had nothing left to lose. With rage blinding him, he leaked everything, every file, every name, every note. He didn't wait for approval, didn't run it through legal channels. He dumped it all online. Social media exploded. The country gasped. News anchors fumbled through reports, trying to explain how a quiet city had been quietly turning citizens into suspects based on skin tone, zip code, and family tree. Protests erupted. Lawsuits flew, and hours later, Julian was found. Abandoned outside a train station, shaken but unharmed. A warning. A message. "We still can reach you." Marcus held him so tightly the boy couldn't breathe. "I'm sorry," he whispered 100 times. "I'm so sorry." But Julian, only 14 and already wise beyond his years, looked up and said, "You didn't do anything wrong, Dad." That's when Marcus broke again. But this time not from fear, from pride. He became a national figure overnight, a reluctant whistleblower, the man who tore down the curtain and exposed what so many feared was true. But it came at a cost. His job, gone. His home, unsafe. His peace, obliterated. He now lived in a rotating series of safe houses. Julian homeschooled. Leah received death threats daily. But the damage to the system was done. Congressional hearings began. The mayor resigned. The city's chief data scientist was arrested. The program was shut down, at least on paper. But Marcus didn't stop. He now works with civil liberties groups, designing tech to spot biased surveillance systems before they go live. He travels, speaks, writes, but he still flinches at shadows, still checks every lock twice, still wonders if justice has a price too steep for the soul. And yet, he says he'd do it all again. Because some truths are too dangerous to ignore. Because his son is still free, and because silence would have made him a prisoner too. Camila Reyes had never been a criminal, never stolen, never cheated, never hurt a soul. But on the night her world turned upside down, none of that mattered. All it took was one lie, one accusation, one moment of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and suddenly everything she knew about justice, safety, and truth came crashing down. The moment still played in her mind like a haunting reel. She was leaving the community center after a long day volunteering, arms full of leftover sandwiches and donated blankets, when the police lights flashed behind her. She hadn't even made it to her car before the officers rushed her. No explanation. No time to speak. She was thrown against the hood of a cruiser, handcuffed with such force that her wrist popped. A voice barked in her ear. "You're under arrest for possession and intent to distribute." Camila's breath caught. Her knees nearly buckled. What? She couldn't speak. She couldn't think. And they didn't care. The officers searched her car, tearing through every seat, every bag. They pulled out a backpack she'd never seen before. Inside, sealed plastic bags of pills. Camila screamed, swore it wasn't hers, begged them to listen. but they looked at her like they already knew her story. "We've heard it before," one said, rolling his eyes. "Nice try." That night, she didn't sleep. The cold concrete bench in the holding cell bit into her back. But it was the humiliation that kept her awake. The realization that in one heartbeat, her identity had been stripped from her and replaced with a label: criminal. She posted bail the next morning with the help of her older brother, Matteo, who looked at her with a mix of confusion and fear. "Tell me it's not true," he whispered. "Of course it's not," she said, tears spilling. But already people were talking. The story had made local news. Youth program leader busted in drug sting. The comments online were brutal. Former friends ghosted her. Parents pulled their kids from the center. Her supervisor put her on indefinite leave. Camila's phone stopped ringing. Her inbox filled with silence. She felt like she was screaming underwater, fighting to breathe, to prove her innocence. But the current kept dragging her down. Her public defender barely knew her name. Her court date loomed. And the evidence? All of it pointed to her. Someone had planted the drugs in her car. She knew it, but she had no way to prove it. The security cameras at the center had been malfunctioning that night. No witnesses, no backup. Just her word against the systems. She fell into a darkness she couldn't name. Days blurred together. She stopped eating. Couldn't sleep without the nightmare of being dragged into the back of that cruiser playing in her head. She remembered the look on her mother's face. Pure heartbreak, the kind that never fully heals. Camila had always been the strong one. The girl who beat the odds. The college graduate from a working-class family. The first to start her own nonprofit. The one who fought for every kid in her neighborhood like they were her own. And now she was being portrayed as a fraud, a monster hiding behind a smile. Then came the betrayal that broke her. One of her former co-workers, someone she had mentored, supported, defended, went on record saying they weren't surprised by the arrest. Claimed Camila had been acting weird for weeks. It was a lie. But it made the story worse. The media circled like vultures. Camila couldn't step outside without cameras flashing. She wore hoodies low over her eyes, walked with her head down. People whispered, pointed, laughed. Even when she screamed in her soul, "I'm innocent," the world didn't want to hear it. Until one person did. Naima, one of the girls from the center, barely 16 and fearless, showed up at her door late one night with a shaky voice and a flash drive. "I didn't know who else to go to," she said. The footage on the drive was from her own phone, recorded the night of the arrest. She had been behind the building, sneaking a cigarette, when she saw two men in hoodies slip something into Camila's car. The timestamp matched. The faces weren't clear, but one had a distinct tattoo on his neck. It was enough. Enough to ask questions. Enough to reopen doubt. With new hope, Camila handed the footage to her lawyer, who, for the first time, actually listened. The case began to crack. Slowly. Reluctantly. More digging revealed one of the arresting officers had been under investigation for misconduct. Then came the revelation. He had a cousin arrested months earlier who had blamed Camila for getting him kicked out of the center. A motive. A setup. A story that finally made sense. When the charges were dropped, Camila didn't cheer, didn't celebrate. She stood silent in front of the courthouse, the sky overcast and heavy, reporters shoving microphones in her face. She simply said, "You believed a lie because of how I look, because of where I'm from. But I'm still here, and I'm not done fighting." But the damage had been done. Her name was cleared, but the stain lingered. Sponsors pulled funding from her nonprofit. Parents didn't rush to re-enroll their kids. And the nightmares? they never fully left. Still, Camila kept going. Because this fight was never just about her. It was about the system that swallowed good people whole and called it justice. It was about the truth that too often goes unheard. And it was about rising even when the world tries to bury you. There are some people who carry their pain in silence, who walk through fire and never speak of the burns. But if you looked closely at Noah Bennett, you'd see the scars beneath his smile. Not the kind etched on skin, but the ones that lived in his heart, deep, quiet, and invisible to those who only saw the surface. To the world, he was just a janitor at a local high school, mop in hand, head down, always humming old soul songs under his breath. Students barely noticed him. Teachers said hello in passing. No one knew his past. No one dared ask. But behind that quiet demeanor was a story so heavy, so painfully raw, it could break even the coldest heart. Noah had once been a rising star in forensic tech. Brilliant, respected, recruited straight out of college by a national crime lab. He was the man who could spot a manipulated frame in 1,000 pixels, the one who testified in high-stakes trials with a voice that never trembled. But brilliance isn't always protection. Not when you're a black man in a system built on assumptions. One case changed everything. A case he thought would make his name. A double homicide, messy and political, with media watching like vultures. Noah found discrepancies in the evidence. Timestamps didn't align. Blood spatter patterns were manipulated. He raised the alarm, thinking he was doing the right thing. But instead of being praised, he was called into a boardroom and told to stand down. The DA needs this conviction, they said. Don't make this complicated. He refused. And a week later, he was arrested. Charged with falsifying evidence. The irony was almost poetic. He lost everything in days. His job, his reputation, his savings. His wife, scared and exhausted, took their daughter and left. Friends stopped answering. The media crucified him. Headlines called him a corrupt scientist. They didn't want the truth, just a villain. And Noah, too broken to fight back, disappeared. That's how he ended up pushing a mop down hallways filled with laughter and lockers, hiding in plain sight. Years passed. Every morning he swept the same floors, emptied the same trash cans, watched students chase dreams he no longer believed in. But one day, something shifted. A freshman named Malik stayed after school, scribbling math formulas in a notebook. Noah noticed him. Every day, Malik sat alone, quiet, determined, eyes burning with the same fire Noah once had. One afternoon, Malik left his notebook behind. Noah picked it up. What he saw stunned him. Advanced equations, unsolved algorithms, designs for a solar engine no adult had taught him. The boy was gifted. That night, Noah cried. Not because he was sad, but because for the first time in years, he felt something spark inside. He made a choice. He began tutoring Malik in secret, after hours, in the janitor's closet turned makeshift lab. Wires, calculators, repurposed computer parts. Week by week, their bond grew. Malik thrived. But good things never come without risk. When Malik was nominated for a citywide science scholarship, school officials asked where he had learned his advanced knowledge. Malik proudly told the truth. Mr. Bennett taught me. Questions followed, investigations reopened, whispers returned. But this time, the truth fought back. Malik's mother, a community activist, demanded the school board listen to Noah's full story. A local journalist dug up the case, the buried evidence, the injustice. The truth came pouring out like water breaking through a dam. Forensic experts reviewed the old case and confirmed Noah had been right all along. The original evidence was tampered with, but not by him. The real criminal, a senior technician with ties to the prosecution, was quietly indicted. Noah's name was cleared. But it wasn't the press conference that broke him. It was the moment Malik, standing in front of hundreds at the scholarship ceremony, said, "This man saved my future when no one else even saw me. He taught me that being broken doesn't mean you're finished. He's my hero." And Noah, stoic, hardened, silent, finally let the tears fall. His license was reinstated. Offers came in, speaking engagements, labs wanting to hire him again. But Noah said no. He stayed, kept his janitor job. Why? Because there were more Maliks. More kids who needed to be seen. He didn't need a lab. He had a hallway, a closet, and a heart still strong enough to lift someone else. Maggie Walsh had spent most of her life caring for others. 40 years as a dedicated nurse, working double shifts, holding the hands of strangers in their final moments, whispering comfort to families who had just lost someone they loved. She was the strong one, the one who never cried in front of patients, who stitched wounds both physical and emotional with quiet grace. But when she retired, alone in a quiet house with no more lives to save, it was the silence that started to haunt her. Her husband had passed a decade earlier from a sudden heart attack, and her only daughter lived 2 states away, consumed by the chaos of raising her own young family. Maggie told herself she was fine, busying her days with gardening, baking, and old mystery novels. But the truth was, she was lonely. Until Charlie came into her life. Charlie was a golden retriever with soft, thoughtful eyes and a calm presence that made the house feel alive again. He had been rescued from a shelter where he'd been passed over too many times. But from the moment Maggie laid eyes on him, she knew. They were saving each other. He followed her everywhere, curled beside her on the couch, walked patiently by her side, and listened as she read aloud in the evenings. Charlie didn't ask for much, but in his gentle way, he gave Maggie everything: companionship, love, and a reason to wake up every morning with purpose. So when Charlie's behavior changed, Maggie noticed immediately. He became restless. He pawed at her side whenever she sat down, nuzzled her chest and stomach with anxious urgency. At night he would whine, circling her bed before lying down only after she reassured him with a hand on his head. At first, Maggie laughed it off. "Silly boy, what are you fussing about?" she'd say, brushing him off. But his worry never stopped. If anything, it intensified. He barked at nothing. He stared at her as if trying to speak. Then the pain started. It was subtle. An ache beneath her ribs, a fatigue she couldn't shake, a deep tiredness that made even small tasks feel mountainous. She chalked it up to aging. She told herself not to overreact. But Charlie wouldn't let it go. One night, after a sudden dizzy spell left her collapsed on the kitchen floor, Charlie stayed pressed against her until the ambulance arrived. He had pulled the emergency alert cord she had forgotten even existed, his teeth still clamped around the string when paramedics rushed in. The tests that followed revealed what Maggie had feared. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Aggressive. Advanced. The doctor's face was grim. "We wouldn't have caught it this early," he admitted, "if it weren't for that dog." Maggie sat in stunned silence as the words settled. She wasn't sure what hit harder, the diagnosis or the realization that Charlie, her sweet, loyal companion, had known something was wrong before anyone else, before even she did. That night, back home, she cradled his face in her hands and sobbed into his fur, whispering, "You knew, didn't you? You saved me, Charlie." The weeks that followed were brutal. Chemotherapy ravaged her body. The hair she once curled every Sunday morning fell out in clumps. Her appetite vanished. Her energy disappeared. There were days she couldn't lift her head, days she begged for it to end. But Charlie never left her side. He lay with her through every nauseated night, gently licked her hand when she cried, and waited patiently during every hospital visit. Nurses noticed. "He's your guardian angel," one said. Maggie nodded weakly. "He's my miracle." The treatment bought her time. Not a cure, but hope. She joined a support group and began writing her story, determined to use whatever time she had left to advocate for canine cancer detection research. "People need to know," she said. "Charlie didn't just save my life. He changed it." She was invited to speak at events, her frail body supported by canes and volunteers, but her voice always strong when she talked about Charlie. Her story went viral. Letters poured in. Strangers sent flowers and poems. One child sent a drawing of Maggie and Charlie flying through the sky with capes, superheroes, hand in paw. But not every day was triumphant. There were relapses. There was fear. There were moments of such overwhelming grief that Maggie could hardly breathe. "I don't want to leave him," she confessed one night to her daughter, tears streaking her pale cheeks. "Who will he have when I'm gone?" Her daughter promised to take Charlie, to love him, to care for him, but Maggie still worried. She couldn't bear the thought of him waiting at the door for a woman who would never return. Yet Charlie seemed to know. On the hardest nights, he would lie on her chest, pressing gently against the very place where the cancer had grown, as if to keep her alive with his warmth. And maybe, in some way, he did. Because Maggie outlived every prediction. Her doctors called her a fighter, but she knew the truth. She didn't fight for herself. She fought for the one who had fought for her. And when the day finally came, peaceful, quiet, sunlight spilling across her quilt as she whispered goodbye, Charlie was there, head resting beside her hand, eyes filled with that same knowing love. The hospice nurse said she smiled with her last breath. Charlie stayed by her bed until they came to take her away. Her daughter said he wouldn't eat for 2 days after. But the world never forgot. Maggie's story became a symbol of something rare and beautiful. The bond between a woman who had spent her life saving others and a dog who gave her that same gift in return. A documentary was made. A scholarship launched in her name. And Charlie? He now lives with Maggie's daughter and grandchildren, surrounded by laughter, kindness, and the love Maggie would have wanted for him. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting a warm golden light across the field, Sam stood there quietly, his eyes locked on the horizon, his hand resting gently on Max's head. The dog who had saved his life, not once, but in 1,000 unseen ways. It had been a long road, one filled with hospital beds, chemotherapy, bone-deep fatigue, and moments when Sam was certain he wouldn't see another sunrise. But through it all, Max had been there, steadfast and strong, sensing every shift in Sam's body before doctors could detect it, curling against his chest on the nights pain stole sleep, and nudging him gently toward hope on the mornings it felt impossible to keep going. The journey had tested every limit Sam had, and now, standing cancer-free beneath the sky, he could finally breathe without fear. and with immeasurable gratitude. Max had been more than a pet. He was the miracle that walked into Sam's life just when everything was beginning to unravel. Long before the diagnosis, before the treatments, before the worst days came, Max had started behaving differently. He sniffed Sam's chest obsessively, whined when he lay down, paced the floor with restless worry. Sam didn't understand at first. The doctors didn't see anything. "He's just being protective," they said. But Max knew. He always knew. When the scans finally revealed the early-stage tumor, small but dangerous, the specialists were shocked. Sam had no symptoms, no pain, no reason to have come in. But Max had seen the invisible. He had sounded the alarm. That early detection saved Sam's life. From that moment forward, everything changed. There were surgeries, harsh treatments, sleepless nights, moments when Sam could barely raise his head. But Max never wavered. Not once. When Sam lost his hair, Max would nuzzle the bare skin of his head gently, as if to say, "You're still you." When Sam cried, Max didn't flinch. He simply sat beside him, patient and present, the way only animals know how to be. And when Sam finally rang the bell at the cancer center, the sound echoing through the hallway like a victory cry, Max was waiting outside, tail wagging, a dog-shaped guardian angel. Their bond had deepened in silence. No words needed, just glances, quiet moments, and the powerful language of loyalty and love. But it was more than emotional support. Max had learned to sense the slightest changes in Sam's scent, in his posture, even in his heartbeat. He would alert Sam before his body began to collapse, before the nausea hit, before the pain came rushing in. He became not just a companion, but a medical lifeline. A dog, yes, but a healer, a therapist, a guardian. When the story of Max's detection reached the local press, it went viral. News outlets came calling. Animal behaviorists studied Max. Doctors marveled. Offers poured in to have Max trained professionally. But Sam refused. "He's already perfect," he said. "He didn't need training. He just needed love. And he gave it all back." Now, months after his final treatment, Sam and Max were walking again through the same neighborhood where everything had begun. People waved. Neighbors stopped to say hello. Kids ran up to pet Max, now nicknamed Dr. Dog by the local school. Sam smiled more these days. Slower, maybe, but deeper. Because life, once fragile and uncertain, now felt vibrant with possibility. But behind that smile was a well of wisdom carved by pain. He remembered the nights when he felt invisible, too tired to reach out, too scared to tell his friends how close he'd come to giving up. He remembered the days when even his reflection in the mirror was a stranger, his skin pale, his frame weak, his hope flickering. He remembered wanting to quit. And he remembered Max, always Max, anchoring him to this world. And so, when he was invited to speak at a cancer awareness event, Sam stood on stage, holding Max's leash, and told the truth. Not just about survival, but about the fight, the loneliness, the fear, the need for support, and the power of listening to the quiet signals life gives us. "My advice," he said, voice steady, "is this: pay attention. To the people around you, to your body, and sometimes to your dog. Love doesn't always speak loud. It nudges. It waits. It stays. Don't ignore it. And if someone, human or animal, is trying to tell you something's wrong, listen. You might just save your life." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the speech, People came up to share their own stories. Survivors, dog owners, people fighting battles no one could see. They thanked Sam. They hugged Max. One woman said, "You gave me hope again." And that was the moment Sam knew. This story wasn't just his. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt like giving up. Anyone who had ever needed someone. Anyone to see them. Anyone who had believed in something greater than themselves. Whether that something was a second chance or a golden retriever with soulful eyes. As Sam and Max walked off stage, the applause still ringing in their ears, he whispered, "You did good, buddy." Max wagged his tail, as if he already knew. They returned to their quiet life, but something had changed. Sam began volunteering at cancer support groups, visiting hospitals with Max, offering comfort to those where he had once stood. Max would sit beside patients, nuzzling their hands, resting his head in their laps. And time again, people said the same thing. "He makes me feel like I'm not alone." And really, isn't that what we all need? In the end, Sam's journey wasn't just about illness. It was about connection, about the idea that healing comes not only from medicine, but from love, real, raw, unwavering love. The kind that doesn't run when things get hard. The kind that stays. Even when you're broken. Even when you're scared. The kind that Max gave. So if this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of love, loyalty, and second chances, we ask you to do something simple, but meaningful. Please like this video. Leave a comment to show your support for Sam and Max. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel. Because here, we tell stories that matter, stories that heal, stories that remind us that sometimes the best medicine doesn't come from a bottle. It comes with fur, a wet nose, and a heart full of unconditional love. Let this story be your reminder. You're not alone. There's always hope. And sometimes, miracles come on 4 paws.